Nova Kooks.
Hello. We need just a few moments of your time.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And how?
This is going to be a really interesting episode.
Oh, yeah.
Josh,
We got this.
Josh is not tired. You can tell the difference. But I think I got it. Could you just talk for a sec, Charles?
Sure, I can talk here for a moment.
Why,
Just normal talking me. Yep.
Out in a boat.
Little Hen says it's time to rock and roll.
Welcome, listener. You're listening to Nova Kooks. This is episode 6. We are 4 East Coast surfers that don't take ourselves too seriously when it comes to surfing or other things. Hence our name, the Nova Kooks. In this podcast, you will hear us talk about surfing on the East Coast of Canada and hear some funny surf stories from our inexperience along the way. Our podcast is meant to not only take you on our surf journey, but to also explore personal growth, adventure, and the world around us, including pop culture and other topics. Today's episode is a Magic Seaweed episode. We will have a conversation today discussing what we know about the magical app called Magic Seaweed. Also, what other things to look for when deciding whether or not to head to the beach with your board for the best possible surf time you could have. We will also discuss surf etiquette and check in on Josh's VW van. Then we'll finish the episode off with the always intriguing question from Charles. Before we begin, I am Jared, and I will be your host. I'm seated with Charles, Josh, and David. Hey, guys.
Oh,
Hello.
hey, Jared.
Hey.
I have several questions I want you to consider.
To start off the episode today, as always, I have prepared a warm-up question. With a few episodes in the can, as they say, I think we can officially all call ourselves podcasters. We've kind of fumbled our way here. I want to ask the group what our top podcasts are. So around the room, tell the audience what podcasts you would recommend listening to. Let's start with Josh.
Thanks, Jared. So podcasts are weird for me because I watch a lot of them on YouTube. So I kind of watch them, I'll call it live. But anyway, Rich Roll has a great podcast that I'm a big fan of. And he has a lot of great guests and he asks a lot of great questions. And the focus on that one is kind of health, fitness, nutrition. He gets into art, entertainment, entrepreneurship, kind of touches on spirituality. But like kind of the more, the thicker, more intense topics, but just with this graceful approach. And he has some really cool people on there as well. Worth checking out. Highly recommend. The other one is actually called Huberman Lab Podcast. And it's hosted by a guy named Andrew Huberman. He's a PhD in neuroscience and is a tenured professor. And he started this podcast and it like simplifies these really complex aspects of would I say neurology? I don't know what's right. Anyway, looks at things like neuroplasticity and kind of rewiring your brain with behaviors and cognitive functioning. Find it super cool. Worth checking out as well. And you can get it on YouTube or you can get it just as a podcast.
Excellent. Charles, what about you? What are some podcasts you like?
Sure. When it comes to podcasts, I typically enjoy pop culture ones that are more long-form interviews. So, Mark Maron's What the podcast. I'll listen to Joe Rogan if there's an interesting guest on. Pete Holmes, You Made It Weird. For other stuff, the Ringer Podcast Network has a lot of good pop culture podcasts. So like The Big Picture be a great movie podcast. And one that I really love is The Rewatchables, where they'll look at old movies and they'll have different categories that they go through. And I think in general with podcasts, what I really enjoy about them, where I'll kind of get a fix, is if there's a topic or a certain band that I'm interested in, and there's a podcast that's doing a deep dive on them, I'll really get into that. And sort of one of my favorite things to think about is the band Kiss. So that's sort of my, secret podcast obsession is listening to Kiss podcasts. Because I really don't have any friends that are into the band. So it's an opportunity for me to kind of like nerd out via these, guys that are talking about Kiss and dissecting everything. But I find that's something that a podcast can definitely offer people is if you don't have an outlet for your interests, you can find like-minded people.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I have a really good friend who always talks about how podcasts, when he listens to them, it's like hanging out with your friends. And he was telling me he was listening to one podcast where they've watched every single Marvel movie, and after they have like a 3-hour podcast, I think it's called Binge Mode. This isn't the one I'm recommending, but it is good. But he always says that it's like watching the movie with your friends and then like hanging out after and chatting about it.
Oh yeah, and it's amazing how deep some podcasts will go. One of my favorite movies is the 1995 movie Heat, and there's a podcast called One Heat Minute, where they dissect each week. There's a different guest on it, and they dissect every minute of the movie Heat. And to dissect the final minute of the movie, they actually have Michael Mann, the director, on with them.
That's crazy. I don't know.
That sounds intense, but
That sounds
awesome
really-
at the same time.
Yeah, David.
David.
What about
yeah.
you, David? What's your favorite podcast?
Well,
bud?
I got a few. So the first one I'm gonna say is it's one basically about sports. It's called Pardon the Interruption, and it's a great one because the layout's so nice. They time the segments, but Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon, the guys who host the podcast, they're just so eloquent, and they've got such different perspectives on sort of culture and sports, and they have great arguments, but in such a respectful and eloquent way. It's just amazing. I really like it, and obviously I love sports. The second one I'm going to talk about is I really love history. And there's one called Hardcore History that I'll throw on. And,
I know that one, yeah.
And they'll kind of talk about all the, really interesting eras of human history and Earth history. But I think it's Dan Carlin, I think is his name.
That sounds right, yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, he just has such interesting anecdotes about things that we think we know about history, but he'll just add these layers on that really is why I love history. It's like, you kind of get into why these things happen, and it could be over something very, small, but it created a chain effect of, just amazing things that have altered the world.
I find that podcast is good. Like, it's storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can listen to that, and they're nice and long. Like, you can really get into them. So that's another one, and then I'll throw my last one in because I think it's really appropriate for us in many ways. It's called The 9 Club, and it's all about skateboarding, and the host, I can't think of his name right away, but he has on, like, sort of, in my opinion, the vintage skaters that I grew up with, and they just talk about sort of, the evolution of tricks and equipment, and anyways, it's really cool. Tony Hawk's been on it. Anyway,
Oh, I know this one.
Yeah.
It's really good.
it is
Yeah.
good, and it's just, I don't know. They talk about the early years of pool skating and
Right.
and bring it to the now, but kind of gives an evolutionary history.
I
Of
really like the
skateboarding.
host of that. He's super laid back. And
Yep.
I watched an episode recently that had Neen Williams.
Okay.
Do you know him? He's also like a really big, I think, Josh, you know him. He's the guy that's been in advertisements for fitness. He's becoming an older
yeah.
skater. Yeah. And
With the long hair?
he has long dreads, and but he's a beast. He's not in it to like, he does a lot of
Functional strength stuff.
functional strength. Yeah.
Huh.
He's not like a big beefcake, but he's like super strong. Yeah. And that podcast with him was really interesting because I think that he had the podcast host over and fed him because he eats like really clean eating. So
Nice.
it was kind of cool. It was really interesting.
The latest one I watched, they had the actor who's in My Name Is Earl, and I didn't really get into that show, not for
Jason
any
Lee.
reason. And Jason Lee was a professional skateboarder and big actor.
Yep.
And he sort of talks about, obviously was big into skateboarding back in the day.
I believe he invented the 360 flip.
Thank you. Yeah, you're
Yep.
absolutely right. And he talks about that.
Yeah.
But then he kind of talks about, getting into acting, and that kind of took over, and skateboarding obviously fell to the wayside. But now he's sort of found it again. And it's interesting to hear sort of his newfound stoke again, if you will.
It's neat how things come back around.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For my podcasting, I got to say, like, when podcasting sort of first took off, it was still sort of it was so strange because I feel like the iPhone was kind of invented and then podcasting was a thing. And I remember I was really, really into CBC Radio 3. They had lost their place on air and found a new home in podcasting during the very early days of podcasting. And I absolutely loved that. It was hosted by Grant Lawrence, and he was such an awesome host. I just looked forward to that every week, and I would listen to it almost twice, and I would download all the music I could possibly find based on any of the recommendations that were played on there. I absolutely loved it. But they don't really exist in the same form anymore. And it's really a shame. I really enjoyed that. If you're listening, CBC, bring it back. It was so good.
That kind of turned into like an online radio station, didn't it?
It sort of did, yeah. But I really enjoyed that. 1 week, it was I think it might have been an hour, maybe 2 hour episode. And it was so great. It was my first experience of checking in weekly with someone that you felt like was your friend, and talking about music that you loved. Because the Canadian music scene at that time was really doing awesome new things. Like Arcade Fire was big, Wolf Parade, New Pornographers, Feist, Broken Social Scene. These were bands that were just really reaching out to other places than just Canada at the time. And it was great to, get to hear interviews, and they'd be on all the time. And it was really cool. But more currently, I've been listening to more movie-related podcasts. One that I just started, that I think just started this year, is called Smartless, and it has Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, and Will Arnett. I think Will Arnett kind of hosts it, and each week one of those three guys will have a secret guest, which is, somebody that they either have worked with before or another celebrity, and they have to sort of guess who it is, and then when they find out, they're always stoked, and then because there's the person, and they get to have a nice chat, and
cool.
It's really fun, and it humanizes all of them. And Jason Bateman, I don't know if you've ever even seen him in interviews. He's such a humble dude.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I have seen that.
Jason Bateman from Arrested Development fame.
Who is it again?
Jason Bateman.
What was it?
Arrested Development fame.
I was just trying to see how many times you'd say Jason Bateman.
Jason Bateman. Thanks, bud. And another one that I've really enjoyed is by the guy, he plays, what's his name? Roy Kent. In Ted Lasso, Brett Goldstein, and it's his podcast called Films to Be Buried With, and I just think that this guy's personality is so great. He's not exactly the same as he is in the show. He's definitely a warmer character. He's really silly, and I really like the journey that he takes his guests on of figuring out what are the best movies. And what movies would you be buried with in different circumstances. It's really cool.
Does he still have the sort of gravelly voice?
No.
Oh, that's too bad. I love that voice.
Yeah, it's put on for
I'm
sure.
sure his other voice is nice too.
It's neat though. You talked about this CBC Radio 3 podcast that used to be out. It's I think that's one of the things, as I've gotten more into podcasts, I've enjoyed is the release of episodes. I like the anticipation or the restriction from being able to binge something. It's it gives you something to look forward to. And then when you finally get it, it's the day of, it's comforting knowing today's the day I get to listen to this, or today's the day I get to watch my episode.
But yeah, it's funny you say that because with Netflix, they'll release a show just all at once, and then you
destroy it.
You destroy it, and then you feel gross after, and then you're not anticipating. Growing up, we were all excited to watch a show on cable. Wednesday night was whatever night, Melrose Place. Yeah.
Now you binge something and finish it, and it's you're all messed up because it's your brain is in the show, so you're thinking about the show.
Yeah.
It's just weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially if it's a darker show like Dexter or something.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, another podcast that I listen to a lot, I have a 8-year-old, and we really enjoy, there's an Australian podcast called Short and Curly, and it's actually really, really cool. There's two hosts and then one guy that kind of comes in and does funny little segments, but they always ask, they have really good topics. They ask a difficult question for kids to really sort through. For example, one of the most recent ones that I see here is it okay to read someone else's diary? And it's really cool because we'll listen to it while we're on road trips, and it has moments where they pause. They ask you to pause the podcast to have a discussion if you're listening with people, and it's really nice. It's good for kids, but it gets me thinking too.
I like that.
Yeah, it's really cool. If you're a parent, Short and Curly, check it out.
Next, please.
All right, moving right along, let's talk about Magic Seaweed. So whenever we're thinking about heading out to the beach, we go to this app that's free called Magic Seaweed, and you can get it on any device. They also have a website, and they have a Facebook page, and it's basically like it's a free surf forecasting site, and it offers a 16-day forecast, and it also has a lot of good surfing photography and videos, and there's a bunch of, they always talk about events that are happening in the global surfing community. But today we want to talk about how us goofballs will read it just to make sure, is it worth going out tomorrow? Well, let's check the app and just what we look for when we're looking at this app on whether or not to go out. So I'm going to start with Charles, where, Charles has a good understanding of it to a certain degree. And maybe after Charles sort of explains a little bit of Magic Seaweed and what he looks for, we'll move to David to sort of fill in the holes of knowledge to help all of you listeners out. So Charles, yeah.
Sure. So yeah, as Jared was saying, you can go to the website, you can download the app. And for different beaches in Nova Scotia or local to Halifax, they'll have Lawrencetown there, Cow Bay, Martinique. What you're looking for on the forecast, the first thing that you'll see is basically how many feet the waves are. So it could be, 3 to 12 feet. So you have the waves. Next to that there, you have basically the timing of the swell. So that's like the duration between waves. So you want a longer wave duration because that means it's more opportunity for the waves to like build up like force and momentum. So if it was only like 2 or 3 seconds, that's really not going to give you much of anything that you can ride. You're looking for something longer, 10 seconds or more would be ideal. The other thing that you're going to be looking at to the far right would be basically the wind direction, and you want it to be going offshore, ideally. So it's going in the opposite direction that the beach is facing. And
that took
there
me
is
a
going to help.
long time to understand.
Yeah, that's going to help prop up the waves. And now another thing to think about with the wind. It could be going offshore, but if it's going at like 36 kilometers an hour, then it's going to be pretty windy and things are going to get pretty blown out there. So, I mean, for me personally, like if it kind of starts getting above the teens, then I can expect it to be a bit windy and choppy. And basically all of this here information, all those conditions, they kind of like add up to a rating of what type of day it's going to be. So you notice the stars there, and it could be like a 1-star day. There might be a no-star day. Or it could be a 4-star day. And that's basically the gist of it from my understanding.
Yeah.
That was a great synopsis. I think you hit on some perfect things there, Charles. Well done. I'm just going to jump in and talk a little more. So everything that you said, and so it's funny. I quickly looked on my phone because prior to Magic Seaweed, and there are other forecasting apps and websites, but prior to that, there was a phone number to call.
Oh yeah.
And those were the days. Because it's funny. I actually looked in my phone to see if it transferred over to this because 20 years ago, I think it was 426-6900. It was like 426-9600. Anyways, doesn't really matter. But then it was a buoy that would sort of, talk in this monotonous computer voice. And it would be like, 6 feet at 12 seconds. But so it gave you all the information. But it was, especially as a younger kook, it like you just, a lot of the times for me, it was a stab in the dark. It was like, and you'd go out and, with limited information, more times than not, you're sitting there in the fog with no waves. And, so it turned out to be a lot more drives than it was, surf trips back then. Now, what a wonderful world we live in, where we can, fire it up, as you said, Charles, and use that information to make an informed decision on when to go. The one thing that I'll add in a little bit more is, you want that north or west winds, so it's blowing A, the fog out, but B, being offshore to build up the waves. But another thing that I find that I'm tuning into a little bit more is it'll also show the swell direction. And I've found that I'm looking at that more, like in addition, like another layer to everything you're talking about. But, you see that coming in
What do you mean swell direction?
So there's a little arrow there. Yeah, kind of where your thumb is. Yeah,
Yes, viewer. Where
Yeah.
my thumb is.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so sometimes it'll be pointing out to, across the ocean to, and Iceland, Greenland. Well, those waves aren't going to be curling around our points and, hitting our beach the right way as much.
So is the arrow in the swell direction, am I right to assume that up means north?
Yeah,
Yeah.
essentially,
So
right?
then you would just picture where the province of Nova Scotia is.
Yeah, so
Okay.
But each
Yeah.
beach is facing in a different direction.
yes,
So
generally speaking.
so you have to understand that like Lawrencetown is facing in a what direction? Oh, I can't remember.
I mean, it's east, like southeast-ish. Like we always think geography-wise that things are sort of north, south, east, west, but when you look at Nova Scotia, really, it's sort of on a nice angle.
So if the arrow is pointing in the opposite direction, it's going to be okay.
Yeah, like you want that coming. So I'll even see, using the information you talked about, Charles, and it'll look great, or it'll look okay. But if that swell direction is kind of like way off to the north and east, and I know like there are some places I know that's not going to wrap around a point and create a wave. So sometimes I'll check that out and, thinking about, Seaforth Cove or the point at Seaforth. Well, you like, even if the conditions aren't as ideal as what we would say is, Great Day at Lawrencetown, if it's coming way in, I might know that, the Cove at Seaforth or some of those points are going to be better than the numbers show because the swell's just going to hit us a little better. So that's a long-winded way of saying I've kind of added that in.
Nice.
And yeah. And the other thing I'll say is sometimes even when things look great, the weather isn't always, totally predictable. And what I've started doing too these days is I try to write down sort of some of the information and how a session went and just see how all those variables line up.
Yeah.
And there are so many, so it doesn't always, but I'm trying to learn a little more, and I find a little journal is helping my
That's
predicting.
a great idea.
Yeah.
I'm gonna totally start that.
Yeah.
Something that was recommended to me too is to also check the weather app, because the weather app will give you sort of confirm the wind direction in whatever area. Because on the weather app, you can go to different places. You can click like that community and see where the wind is blowing in that community to relate it to what you're seeing on Magic Seaweed. I was also recommended once to there's a couple buoys out past the harbor. One of my neighbors actually does maintenance on them. It's the National Data Buoy Center. And if you just Google National Data Buoy Center, you can find buoys from all over the world, but you can see that there's about 2 or 3 that would relate to surfing, and you can check out how high the waves are because they're measuring all of that all the time. I find it really complicated to understand. I sometimes I'll look at Magic Seaweed and then I'll go out and surf and then I'll kind of look at the buoy because I'm still learning, because it's not honest to what you're going to get on the beach, but it's a pretty good predictor.
Totally.
It's crazy the information we have access to just on our phones. Like,
yeah.
we're talking about accessing buoy data. We're talking like we can access weather data that'll give us wind direction in a certain region. Like,
Yeah.
that's crazy, especially when you think Dave said 20 years ago we were calling a phone number and it was like 6 feet at 10 seconds. And that's all you knew for like Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
It's crazy too, because I remember growing up, we would call the weather line with the local radio to figure out what the weather was going to be that day. Or like, I remember, is it going to be a snow day tomorrow? So I'd call the weather line like 100 times. I think I still remember the number.
678-2330.
Yeah.
Just for the record, it doesn't work anymore.
No,
I tried it like a month ago.
that's in the valley. Yeah. In
Cool.
Annapolis Valley of Nova Scotia. But then, getting this smart device in the weather app, like the, what do you guys use? I use the Weather Network or Environment Canada.
I think I use the weather. Yeah, the weather network.
Yeah, Weather Network.
Yeah. And I find that, it's good with the Weather Network. It's really easy to access the information for wind direction in each area too. We just a few little finger touches.
Yep.
It was interesting before you were talking about how you're still learning, Dave. We kind of consider you our sort of surf guru in a lot of ways, and
Sensei.
our sensei. That's right. But you're still learning too, and there's moments where we were recently out surfing, and you we'll talk more about this in a future episode, but you weren't opposed to just playing in the whitewash with us because we were all, it was sort of a couple of our first time out in a while, and there's a lot of benefit to that. Awesome. So that's been Magic Seaweed to the best of our knowledge. Hopefully someday we'll interview somebody that knows more and they can help fill in some holes for us.
Today we're going to talk about modern etiquette, because believe it or not, you can still be polite.
One thing that I really want to talk about today is surf etiquette. Just really briefly, that's something that I feel is important, especially if you're a beginner surfer or a visitor to Nova Scotia. Like maybe you've surfed a couple times and have had success, but I feel like it's just kind of important. For me personally, I always want to be out of people's way, and I don't want to interfere with the time that others have. When I feel like I'm in someone else's zone, they've been there for a while, I really don't want to disrupt their good time, but I also want to try to make sure that I'm having a good time. And just like any sport, skiing, surfing, running, going for a walk, there's a certain etiquette. And I think especially with surfing in Nova Scotia, where it's getting way more popular, I think it would be really important for us to quickly talk about that. I have my feelings about it, but I'd maybe go around the room real quick and just sort of say maybe a couple things that you can think of that would be important, just etiquette, thinking about the other surfers. Dave?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, etiquette's important in terms of just safety. We're in the ocean. There's elements. There's very expensive surfboards, and there's your body, and we have to be responsible for ourselves, but also the people around us. And I think that's important, and I think that little bit of etiquette can go a long way to be respectful, but also make sure that you're living your best life and enjoying a surf. So I think number one, I would just say kind of, it's just like a self-awareness thing. Know your limits. And I know that that's, everyone has heard that before, but just be honest with yourself. Like, stick off on the shoulder, or, we talked about some beaches that are great for beginners that, I mean, I'd rather have a good time and not have to worry about people's safety, and maybe choose a place that's not as big, or, going off as another spot where I know that there's more experienced surfers.
To go along with what you're saying before you move on, I think about, I'm trying to teach my daughter to be, I don't want to be that helicopter parent that tells her to stop doing dangerous things. So I always try to tell her to do it carefully, really think about what you're doing, make sure you're comfortable with what you're doing. And a common thing I'll say is, run as fast as you're willing to fall. Like, be careful, like same kind of concept with surfing.
Absolutely. I mean, I just think just knowing yourself, knowing the conditions, knowing your limitations, and just kind of being within it. You want to have fun, but you don't want to be putting someone else's health and equipment in danger because you're trying to, go beyond who you are and what you can do. And I think you can do that. I think you can surf and have fun. And I think you can find a place where you can do that away from other people if you're not comfortable being around other people. But also, I think another thing that goes a long way is saying hi to people, as you paddle out. And I do think that you can bring a certain amount of positive attitude and, like,
it is a community,
respect, on your paddle out, you can smile, you can wave, but know that when it is ideal conditions and it's big, there are people who've been surfing for a long time. They're incredible surfers. They're very talented. And you may, let's be honest, you may want to give them their space, obviously, and respect that they've been there before you, and you can be off.
You can learn a lot from watching.
You can watch, and you can be competitive if you want to, but I don't recommend it. And it can get aggressive when the conditions are great, because everyone's clamoring for that that perfect wave. If you're a beginner, you don't need to be out there looking for that perfect wave. There are other places to go that are safer and better to learn on.
Softer green waves.
Yeah.
I also, I think of this one story, which kind of brings me into another little etiquette chat. I remember I went out one time with you, Dave, and I was right at this moment where I was starting to feel more comfortable with trying those bigger waves. And I was at the reef in Lawrencetown, and I think there was some younger guy, younger than me anyway, and it sort of seemed like he was super excited and like he was like a visitor or something. And I remember he came and took like 3 of the waves that I was going for and just did not respect the lineup. And it was the first time I experienced that, where I was actually kind of irritated because I was like, I'll wait for you, but I clearly have this, and he did it 3 times, just totally ignored me. And, I was at a stage where him ignoring me was more dangerous for him than me, because I was still learning control on those waves, and he could have easily made me feel jittery, and then we would have both been toast. So that's an important thing that I just wanted to bring up is the etiquette of the lineup. Maybe even like in volleyball, when you see the ball come and you say, I got it, just sort of communicating that in a way like, I got it, or you go next, and communicate out there when you're definitely in a bigger, like when there's more people out, one at a time, man.
Yeah.
Josh, Charles, do you guys have any other etiquette things that come to mind as you guys have been?
Sure. Yeah. I'll just reiterate what you guys were saying about knowing your limitations or knowing where you're at. So if you're just starting out, I guess if you're going out there, like ideally don't go out on your own, especially if it's like a bigger day. You just want to make sure that you're staying safe yourself. Some basic etiquette things to keep in mind is your board. Keep your board under control. You don't want it getting away and potentially hitting other surfers. And in terms of like knowing your limitations, like if you're comfortable on a beach break, that's great. If you want to work up to the reef or a point, kind of like progress to those points where you're, comfortable and confident getting, moving on to those points. And I think it's a great point that you guys made where you're saying like, it's important to pay attention to the lineup, but incredibly important to pay attention to your surroundings, who's around you, and sort of like it can just be kind of like that eye contact or communication of, who has a wave. And like we all make mistakes. If you do get in someone's way, just like apologize, like right away. And then the other thing that I'll mention is where the waves are breaking, do not paddle out into that there. You want to kind of paddle around where they're breaking so you can get out.
Yeah, especially if there's like a lineup and then you're paddling towards people that are trying to catch that wave.
Exactly. So if you kind of like, you catch a wave, you go down and you decide like, I'm just going to take the short route and just kind of like paddle into the, where people are surfing, you're going to, annoy everyone and you're actually going to create a lot of work for yourself.
And on the other side of that too, for more experienced surfers, sometimes it's easy to forget to like be patient with us learners, help us out. Like we're making these mistakes because we don't know. Tell us. Yeah.
Conversation goes a long way.
It really does. And teach us, because we just want to be better so that we're not in your way and we can do what you do. Yeah.
I would say if we tied the app with etiquette and being a beginner, if you've figured out that green means it's good to go, but it's saying it's like a 6 or a 10-foot wave for a beginner, that's a big wave if it's 6 feet. I might even, I would suggest, like, in terms of safety, hold off on that one.
Yeah.
I've been surfing for a while, and I look at a 6-foot wave and I'm like, maybe I'll have more fun on another day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good one. Yeah.
As much as I'd like to be like, oh boy, this is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
One thing we should also say is, like we talked about the wave and etiquette, one really important thing to know is the app's not always going to be right. Your eyes are what's right. Your eyes are the thing that knows what's best for you.
Oh yeah. Sometimes you just got to take a drive, but if you don't have time to take a drive, check the app.
Yeah.
Build a Volkswagen.
All right, we're going to move on, guys. So over the past few years, Josh has been working on the Nomad Surfer's Dream, a 1975 Volkswagen van. Did I say it right, Josh?
Yes.
Perfect. He's been refurbishing it and making it roadworthy. I feel like you've been doing this for
Since August 10th of 2010.
Wow, buddy. It's been a slow go.
Yeah.
How about you quickly talk us through the history of that so that in future episodes we can check in and see how this massive journey is going for you?
So I'll tell you how I got it first. I had this big epic dream I was going to travel across the country. And if I was going to travel across the country, I was going to do it in a Volkswagen van. Like, how else do you have that epic journey, right? On top of that, I was moving to Vancouver to try and work in the music industry. So I was like, epic trip, epic change, here we go. So I bought this 1975 Volkswagen van in Debert, Nova Scotia. Anyway, bought the van, drove it home. Knew I needed to do a little bit of work before I took this epic trip. And a little bit of work turned into a lot of work, and I couldn't finish it. It needed way more than I ever thought it did. I was young and didn't really realize. And the time came that I had to go to Vancouver. So I left it in my parents' garage, and then over like 3 years, it wouldn't start anymore, and the tires were flat, and it needed all this stuff. And so I kind of couldn't sell it as it was. It was like, what do you do? So I started to fix it up, and somebody was going to fix the body for me. So I made a deal with them, and they took it and had it for 5 years. And I kind of like checked in, and then things didn't really happen. And then 5 years later, they told me they couldn't fix it anymore, and I had to come pick it up. So at this point, it was kind of cut apart and taken apart. I had no place to put it at that point, so I shoved it in a chicken barn in Port Williams, Nova Scotia.
Wow.
And it sat there for a year and a half. And I have some pictures. We'll put them on our social media. They're kind of cool. It's like stuffed in the back of this barn. It's like straight out of a movie. Then in 2019, I made another deal. Somebody started to work on it again, and so it got totally torn apart. Like the bottom got cut off. It got put on like a chicken rotisserie and turned upside down.
I'm noticing a theme here.
Yeah. And so now it's all back together, back on wheels. It's painted out on the inside. The top's back on and painted, and it just needs to be painted on the outside, and then I'll put it back together. In parallel to that, like the engine's rebuilt, the transmission's ready. Yeah.
So it's close.
Is it roadworthy now?
No. Well, no, because it has no paint on it, and the engine is sitting on a cable spool in the garage. But like, if you were to put all of those things together, it would be able to get inspected, and you could put it on the road.
When do you think you'll have it on the road?
It's probably another 6 to 12 months away. But I mean, what's 12 months in 11 years?
Jeez, nothing.
Is it a camper top or is it like a bus?
Yeah.
Oh,
it's
wow.
like the bright orange, like Westphalia style.
Beautiful.
Looks like a big creamsicle.
Yeah.
I remember when you drove that into my driveway. It feels like 15 years ago, but I guess that was 12
I'm pretty
years ago.
sure, like, you know how the vans have that big Volkswagen emblem on the front? I pulled into his driveway and it fell off in the driveway.
Something like that. I remember that.
I'm here.
It's a sign.
I also remember you, like, one side got stuck and, like, you drove
Yes.
back home and, like, one side of the pop top, like, was just up.
Yeah.
I was like, you're going to take that to Vancouver? Oh, man.
Would have been epic.
That's so cool.
Didn't happen.
My old neighbor and very good surfer, he has an VW camper van, or I should say he actually traded it on something different. But going out to I'll relate it to surfing. Putting the surfboards in that VW van and going out to the beach was a perma insta smile. Like you felt
Totally.
so happy.
Yeah.
You just felt like you were doing something really neat that no one else was really doing at that time. Like, I don't know. It's instant fun.
There's something about that van, like the Volkswagen van and surfing, that just really seems to go together. Well, even
It's iconic or something. I can't describe it.
What
but
is
like,
it? The East Coast Surf School, which is sort of run by the same people that own the Lawrencetown Surf Shop. That's the same, right?
There's got to be a connection there.
I think there is. Well, they have the van out front all the time.
Makes sense. That's a beautiful van.
So mine is the same, except it has the camper top on it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Except yours is a year different or something, isn't it?
I think theirs might be a 73 and mine's a 75.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's just like, it kind of just goes along with Lawrencetown now, is like that van is almost like matched the yellow tea house on the hill.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
They've done some nice work on that van too.
It's on your shirt.
Oh,
Yeah, there you go.
it's on my shirt.
That exact van, I think, is on David's shirt. Okay, guys, I think we've talked about enough stuff. We'll check back in with Josh's van in a future episode. And it's that time again for the always intriguing final question from Charles. Take it away, Charles.
This is Charles.
All right, this week's question. What's better, a New York cop with an LA attitude or an LA cop with a New York attitude?
I think an LA cop with a New York attitude.
Why?
I don't know. I just feel like it would have so much contrast. It would be entertaining. I picture it as like a character in a movie.
It is a character in a movie. Several movies. I'm instantly thinking like Bruce Willis Die Hard. He does both.
Was that in LA?
Well, the first one was in LA, but he was a New York cop in LA. And then the second one, he was in New York at an airport, but he had moved to LA to be with his wife. Who and he
Okay.
was so then at that point.
So
he
my
was in
answer
LA.
is very spot on then.
Yeah.
It would be great in a movie.
I'm gonna say the same as Josh. LA cop with a New York attitude.
You know what? You guys, you give compelling arguments. However, I feel like if I was in New York City, and I haven't decided on what dialect or way of speech this person would have, but I feel like a laid-back LA cop in New York City would be kind of like, I don't know, I just picture being pulled over by a New York cop and be like, oh boy, here we go. And then if they were like really laid back and like LA, I just think I'd get a kick out of that. For no other reason than that. I think
If
that'd
it was
be kinda funny.
Pappas pulling us over,
If Pappas
in New
pulls
York,
me over in New York City or like Brooklyn or the Bronx, I think I'd be laughing.
So there's this place. It's got some great meatball subs.
I feel like it's got if it's an LA cop in New York though, it's a comedy. Whereas if it's
Yes.
a New York cop in LA,
Fair enough.
It's a grizzled like action
Yeah.
flick.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. Yeah, you're probably right.
Charles.
I'm going to go with the New York cop with the LA attitude. There's just something about it that seems funny to me. I feel
See?
like
Comedy.
I feel
Yeah, I think
like
you're right, Josh. Yeah.
the LA cop that has the New York attitude, I feel like that isn't going to fly in LA. He's like too hard boiled.
Well, I picture all the conflict and like dissonance of it. He just doesn't fit in. But he probably solves some like epic crime because he's
He takes care of business in LA.
yeah.
Yippee-ki-yay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's just eating hot dogs all the time.
Yeah.
Great question. Great question.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for listening. I hope you got some good tips with using Magic Seaweed and you were able to think about some surf etiquette. Join us next time. Thank you. I've been Jared.
I've been David.
Charles.
And I'm still Josh.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening to Nova Kooks. This has been our 6th episode. Join us next time for more kooky surf moments, beginner surf tips, music and movie talk, and eccentric questions from Charles. Next time on the podcast, we're going to talk about a recent surf trip we took to Martinique Beach. It's going to be awesome. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram for more Nova Kook adventures. Take care. Be well.